You check your bank account on a Tuesday afternoon, not because you're worried exactly, but because you've been trying to save and you want to see if you're making progress. The number sits there on the screen. Maybe it's $800. Maybe it's $1,200. And you feel this weird mix of pride and nothing. Like, yeah, you saved something, but also, what does it even matter? You can't buy a car with $1,200. You can't put a down payment on a house. You can't quit your job or take 3 months off to travel. It just sits there, this small number that feels simultaneously like an achievement and completely pointless. My name is Tom, and I remember sitting in my apartment 7 years ago, staring at a savings account that had just crossed $1,000 for the first time in my adult life. I was 26. I'd been working full-time for 4 years. And honestly, I felt embarrassed. $1,000 in 4 years felt like a joke. I had friends buying houses, or at least talking about buying houses. I had a cousin who'd started investing in index funds when he was 22, and now at 28 he had this whole portfolio that sounded impressive when he talked about it at family dinners. And there I was with $1,000 feeling like I'd barely moved the needle. But here's the thing nobody tells you, and I mean really tells you, not in some generic you got this kind of way. That first $5,000, it changes nothing. And then quietly, without you fully noticing when it happens, it changes everything. It doesn't buy you a new life. It doesn't unlock some magical level of wealth where suddenly everything is easier. But it does something far more important, something most people miss because they quit too early, or because they're too busy looking at everyone else's highlight reel to notice what's happening in their own nervous system. It shifts, something internal. It changes the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. And once that shift happens, once you become the kind of person who can save $5,000, the next $5,000 comes faster. And the $5,000 after that comes even faster. But first, you have to survive the invisible phase, the part where it feels like you're doing everything right and getting nowhere. The part where every dollar saved feels like screaming into the void. Because that phase, that's where most people quit. And that's exactly what we need to talk about. Let's be honest about what the beginning actually feels like. You decide you're going to get serious about money. You're going to save. You're going to build an emergency fund. You read all the articles, you listen to the podcasts. You feel motivated. You set up automatic transfers. Maybe you cut back on eating out. Maybe you cancel a subscription or two. And for the first month, it feels kind of good. You're doing something. You're taking control. And then the second month comes. And you check the account. And yeah, it's growing, but it's growing so slowly. You saved $300 this month. Which is great, technically. But $300 doesn't change anything. Your life looks exactly the same. You still have the same job, the same apartment, the same worries. If your car broke down tomorrow, $300 wouldn't fix it. If you lost your job, $300 would last maybe a week if you were lucky. It's not nothing, but it also kind of feels like nothing. This is what I call the invisible phase. It's the part where you're doing all the right things, but you can't see the results yet because the results aren't visible in the way you expect them to be. You're not richer in any tangible sense. You haven't unlocked any new capabilities. The world still looks at you the same way. You look at yourself the same way. You're just a person who's saving a little bit of money. And that doesn't feel like enough. What makes this phase so brutal is that you're operating on pure discipline. There's no momentum yet. There's no habit groove worn into your brain that makes this feel automatic. Every dollar you save is a conscious choice, a small act of resistance against every other thing you could do with that money. You walk past a store window and see something you want, and you have to actively choose not to buy it. You say no to happy hour because you're trying to save, and you feel that tiny social friction. Your friends are still living their normal lives, and you're over here acting like $300 in a savings account is some kind of accomplishment. And here's what nobody prepares you for. It doesn't feel good yet. People talk about financial discipline like it's supposed to feel empowering from day one, but in reality, early saving feels like restriction. It feels like denial. It feels like you're being responsible and boring while everyone else is out there living. You're in this weird limbo where you're too broke to relax but not broke enough to justify giving up. It's uncomfortable. I remember this phase vividly. I'd save for 2 months, get my account up to maybe $1,500, and then something would happen. Not even something dramatic. Just life. A friend's birthday dinner that was more expensive than I expected. A prescription that my insurance didn't fully cover. A parking ticket. And suddenly I'd be back down to $1,000, and it felt like I'd made no progress at all. Like I was on a treadmill, running hard and staying in place. The psychological weight of this is hard to overstate, because when you're broke, like really broke, living paycheck to paycheck with nothing in savings, there's almost a strange kind of freedom in it. You can't save money because there's no money to save. You're just surviving. But when you start trying to save, that's when you notice every dollar. That's when you become hyper-aware of every choice. That's when you feel the friction between who you are now and who you're trying to become. And that friction is exhausting. Most people quit here. Not because they're lazy or undisciplined, but because this phase lasts longer than anyone tells you it will. You think getting to $1,000 will feel like a milestone. And maybe it does for a day. But then it just feels like $1,000, a number that can't do much. You think getting to $2,000 will feel different. And it does. Slightly, but not enough to justify all the sacrifices. So you start to rationalize, you start to think, what's the point? I'm never going to have real money anyway. I might as well enjoy what I have now. And this is where everything falls apart for most people. Because they don't understand that the point of the first $5,000 isn't the money itself. It's the identity shift. Let me tell you what happened to me around the $3,000 mark. I'd been saving for almost a year. Slowly, painfully slowly. My checking account had a routine balance that hovered around $200 after rent and bills, and my savings account sat there at $3,000 untouched, like this weird little trophy I couldn't spend. And one day my laptop died. Just fully bricked itself. Wouldn't turn on. I used that laptop for everything. Work, personal projects, basically my entire digital life. And my first instinct, my immediate gut reaction, was panic. Because I knew a decent replacement laptop would cost at least $800, maybe more. But here's the weird part. I didn't panic about the money, or not the way I used to. For the first time in my adult life, I had the money. I had $3,000 in savings, and $800 of it could go toward this laptop without destroying me. I wouldn't have to put it on a credit card. I wouldn't have to ask my parents for help. I wouldn't have to scramble or stress, or try to figure out some payment plan. I could just handle it. And I did. I transferred the money, bought the laptop, and my savings dropped to $2,200. And you know what? It didn't feel like failure. It felt like exactly what savings was supposed to be for. I'd had an emergency. I'd handled it. The system worked. That moment, that specific experience of having something go wrong and realizing I could deal with it, that changed something in my brain, It wasn't about the dollar amount, it was about what that dollar amount represented. It represented a version of me who could handle problems, a version of me who wasn't constantly one crisis away from disaster, a version of me who had options. This is what people mean when they talk about an emergency fund. But they usually explain it in such a boring way that you miss the emotional reality of it. They say, you should have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in case you lose your job. And sure, okay, that's technically true. But that's not what an emergency fund actually does for you psychologically. What it does is remove a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that you didn't even know was there until it's gone. When you don't have savings, every unexpected expense is a threat. Your car makes a weird noise, and your stomach drops. You get a text from your dentist about a cavity, and you feel dread. A friend invites you to a wedding 3 states away, and you start calculating whether you can afford the flight, the hotel, the gift, the whole thing. You're always running these calculations in the background of your mind, always trying to figure out how to make it work, always aware that you're one bad month away from real trouble. But when you have $5,000 sitting in a savings account, that hum gets quieter, not silent. $5,000 isn't enough to solve every problem, but quieter. You start to realize that most emergencies aren't actually that expensive. Most problems can be solved with a few $100 or $1,000. And knowing you have that buffer, knowing you can handle most of what life throws at you. That's when you start to feel different. That's when you start to move through the world differently. You stop making decisions from a place of fear. You stop saying yes to things you don't want to do because you're worried about money. You stop feeling like you're constantly one step away from falling apart. And this is the shift that matters. This is the thing that changes everything, even though externally, nothing has changed. You still have the same job. You still live in the same place. You're not suddenly rich, but internally, you're a different person. There's this concept in psychology called identity-based habits. The idea is that the most powerful way to change your behavior isn't to focus on what you want to achieve, but to focus on who you want to become. It's the difference between saying, I want to save $5,000 and saying, I am the kind of person who saves money. One is a goal. The other is an identity. And here's the thing. Identity is built through evidence. You can't just decide you're a certain type of person and believe it. Your brain doesn't work that way. You have to prove it to yourself, over and over, until the evidence is so overwhelming that your sense of self starts to shift. Every time you choose to save instead of spend, you're casting a vote for the identity you're trying to build. Every time you check your savings account and see it grow, even by a little bit, you're reinforcing the story that you're someone who can do this. The first $5,000 is the accumulation of enough evidence that your brain finally accepts the new identity. You're no longer someone who wants to save money. You're someone who does save money. You're someone who has money. And once that identity locks in, everything gets easier. Because here's what people don't understand about willpower and discipline. They're terrible long-term strategies. Willpower is a finite resource. You can white-knuckle your way through a few months of strict saving, but eventually, you're going to get tired. Eventually, you're going to slip. This is why New Year's resolutions fail. This is why most diets fail. People try to force behavioral change through sheer effort, and effort alone isn't sustainable. But identity? Identity is sustainable. Because once you see yourself as a certain type of person, you start making choices that align with that identity automatically. You don't have to fight yourself. You're not resisting temptation with willpower. You're just doing what someone like you would do. And someone like you, someone who has $5,000 in savings, doesn't blow their money on impulse purchases. Not because they're disciplined, but because it doesn't fit who they are anymore. I saw this play out in my own life in weird little ways. After I hit $5,000 in savings, after I'd rebuilt it back up past that $3,000 mark following the laptop purchase, I noticed I stopped checking my bank account obsessively. I used to log in multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day, just to see where I stood. But once I had a real cushion, I didn't need to anymore. I knew I was okay. I knew I had room. That mental space that had been occupied by constant money anxiety, it freed up. I started sleeping better. I started making decisions at work from a place of confidence instead of desperation. I started feeling like a person who had their life together, even though objectively my life looked pretty much the same as it had a year earlier. And then something even stranger happened. I started saving faster. Not because I was making more money, I wasn't. Not because I'd cut my expenses dramatically, I hadn't. But because saving had become part of who I was. It wasn't a chore anymore. It was just what I did. The second $5,000 took half the time the first $5,000 had taken. The third $5,000 took even less. The habit had compounded. Let's talk about why most people quit before they get here. Because I think this is the most important part, honestly. The reason most people never build wealth isn't because they don't understand compound interest or because they don't know they should save. It's because they quit during the invisible phase. They quit when the results don't match the effort. They quit when saving feels hard and pointless and like nothing is changing. And you can't really blame them, because culturally, we've set up this expectation that financial progress should be visible, immediate, and exciting. We see people on social media talking about their wins. Paid off my car, bought my first house, hit 6 figures in investments. And those are great milestones, genuinely. But what we don't see is the 2 years of boring, grinding, saving $200 a month before any of that became possible. We don't see the phase where it felt like nothing was happening. We don't see the doubt. So people start saving, and they expect it to feel good right away. They expect to see progress they can point to. And when they don't, when it's just this slow accumulation of small amounts that don't seem to change anything, they assume they're doing it wrong. They assume it's not worth it. They assume they're the exception, the person for whom this won't work. But the truth is, everyone goes through the invisible phase. Everyone. The people who make it to the other side aren't special. They're not more disciplined or smarter or better with money. They just didn't quit. They kept going through the part where it felt pointless. They trusted that the process would work even when they couldn't see the evidence yet. This is what delayed gratification actually looks like in real life. It's not dramatic. It's not inspirational. It's just continuing to do the thing even when the thing feels stupid. It's saving another $200 when your account already has $1,800 and thinking, what difference does $200 make? And doing it anyway. It's choosing not to buy something you want, not because you can't afford it, but because you're building toward something bigger, even though that bigger thing still feels abstract and far away. And this is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. Because you're rewiring your brain's reward system. Your brain is used to instant gratification. It's used to spending money and getting something immediate in return. A meal, a new shirt, a fun experience. Saving money gives you nothing immediate. It asks you to value future security over present pleasure, and that goes against every instinct your brain has. But if you can push through that discomfort, if you can sit with the feeling of doing something that doesn't feel good yet, you reach a tipping point. And the tipping point is usually somewhere around $5,000. Because $5,000 is enough to change the game psychologically. It's enough to cover most emergencies. It's enough to give you breathing room. It's enough that you start to feel wealthy in a way you didn't before, even though objectively $5,000 isn't life-changing money. But subjectively, it changes everything. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how you make decisions. It changes your entire relationship with money. And once that changes, the behavior follows. There's a momentum to money that people don't talk about enough. When you have nothing, saving feels impossible because every dollar is already spoken for. When you have a little something, saving feels pointless because it's not enough to matter. But when you cross that threshold, when you have enough that it actually feels like something, saving becomes easier. Not because your circumstances changed, but because your psychology changed. You start to see your savings as something real, something valuable, something worth protecting and growing. You stop seeing it as this abstract number that doesn't affect your life and start seeing it as a tool, a foundation, a part of your identity. And once that happens, you start making different choices automatically. You start asking yourself different questions. Instead of, can I afford this? You start asking, do I want to spend my money on this? The first question is about capability. The second question is about values. And that shift, from thinking about money as a constraint to thinking about money as a choice, that's what wealth actually is. Not the amount you have, but the freedom to choose. And I'm not saying $5,000 makes you wealthy in any traditional sense. But it makes you wealthy in the sense that matters most. It gives you options. It gives you time. It gives you the ability to say no to things that don't serve you. And that's the beginning of real financial freedom. Because here's the thing about building wealth. It's not actually about money. Money is just the tool. What you're really building is a different relationship with yourself. You're building self-trust. Every time you set money aside and don't touch it, you're proving to yourself that you can delay gratification. Every time you face an unexpected expense and handle it without falling apart, you're proving to yourself that you can handle problems. Every time you choose long-term stability over short-term pleasure, you're proving to yourself that you can think beyond today. And that self-trust compounds just like money compounds. The more evidence you accumulate that you're capable, the more capable you become. The more you see yourself as someone who makes good decisions, the more good decisions you make. The more you believe you can build something, the more likely you are to actually build it. This is why the first $5,000 is so hard and so important. It's not about the money itself. It's about proving to yourself that you can do something difficult that doesn't pay off immediately. It's about building a foundation of self-trust that will carry you through every other financial decision you make for the rest of your life. I want to go back to that moment with the laptop for a second, because I think it illustrates something crucial. When I had to spend $800 on that laptop, I didn't feel like I'd lost progress. I felt like the system had worked. And that's a completely different emotional experience than what I would have felt a year earlier. A year earlier, if my laptop had died, I would have felt victimized. I would have felt like life was happening to me, like I was being punished, like I couldn't catch a break. I would have put it on a credit card and felt anxious about the debt for months. I would have resented the expense. I would have felt behind. But with $3,000 in savings, the exact same event felt manageable. I felt like an adult handling a problem. I felt capable. I felt like someone who had their life together. And that emotional difference, that's everything. Because building wealth isn't about never having problems. It's about being able to handle problems when they come up. It's about reducing the emotional charge of unexpected expenses. It's about moving from a state of constant anxiety to a state of relative calm. And $5,000 in savings is usually the threshold where that shift happens. $5,000 means that most car repairs won't devastate you. Most medical bills won't ruin you. Most life surprises can be absorbed without completely derailing your progress. And once you have that cushion, once you know you can handle the normal chaos of life, you stop operating from a place of fear. You stop making decisions designed to avoid disaster and start making decisions designed to build something. This is when people start investing. This is when people start thinking about buying a house. This is when people start negotiating for higher salaries because they're not desperate to keep any job at any cost. This is when people start taking risks that could pay off because they have a safety net to fall back on. The first $5,000 doesn't give you all of those capabilities directly, but it gives you the foundation that makes all of them possible. Let me talk about the emotional weight of money for a minute, because I think this is something people really underestimate. Money isn't just numbers in an account. Money is security. Money is freedom. Money is options. Money is peace of mind. And when you don't have money, you carry this constant background stress that affects everything else in your life. You ever notice how hard it is to focus on anything meaningful when you're worried about money? How hard it is to be present with friends or family when you're running calculations in your head about whether you can afford rent next month? How hard it is to think about your career or your health or your relationships when you're just trying to survive financially? That's the weight I'm talking about. It's not dramatic. It's not a crisis. It's just this constant low-level noise that takes up mental bandwidth. And most people live with that noise for years, decades even, without realizing how much energy it's consuming. But when you build savings, when you get to that point where you have a cushion, the noise gets quieter, and suddenly you have mental space for other things. You can think about what you actually want out of life instead of just what you can afford. You can make decisions based on what's best for you instead of what's most financially safe. You can breathe. This is why people who have savings often seem more confident, more relaxed, more put together. It's not that they're better people. It's that they're not carrying that weight anymore. They've freed up mental and emotional bandwidth that was being used to worry about money, and now they can use it for something else. And again, $5,000 isn't the end of financial stress, but it's usually enough to quiet the noise. Significantly, it's enough to move from survival mode to something that looks more like stability. And that shift is profound. So what's the point of all this? Why does any of it matter? Here's what I want you to understand. If you're in the invisible phase right now, if you're saving slowly and it feels pointless and you're wondering why you're even bothering, you're not doing it wrong. You're doing it exactly right. The fact that it's hard means you're building something real. The fact that it feels like nothing is changing means you're in the most important phase. The phase that most people quit before they reach the other side. The first $5,000 doesn't change your life in any visible way. You won't suddenly be rich. You won't suddenly have everything you want. But it will change you. It will change how you see yourself, how you handle stress, how you make decisions, and how you move through the world. And those internal changes are what make everything else possible. The hardest money you will ever save is the first money, because you're not just building a bank account, You're building a new identity. You're proving to yourself that you're capable of something you weren't capable of before. You're rewiring habits, changing patterns, and establishing a foundation that will support everything else you build. And once you get there, once you hit that $5,000 mark and feel the shift, the moment when you realize you're not the same person you were when you started, the next 5,000 comes faster. The momentum builds, the habits solidify, the identity becomes real, and what felt impossible at the beginning starts to feel inevitable. You're not saving money just to have money. You're saving money to become the kind of person who has money. You're saving money to prove to yourself that you can do hard things. You're saving money to buy yourself options, space, and peace of mind. And all of that starts with the decision to keep going when it feels like nothing is happening. So if you're at $800 right now, keep going. If you're at $1,500, keep going. If you're at $3,000 and wondering if it even matters, keep going. Because you're closer than you think to the moment when everything shifts. You're closer than you think to becoming the kind of person who can handle life, who has options, who doesn't live in constant fear of the next unexpected expense. The first $5,000 changes nothing, and then quietly, without fanfare, it changes everything. And you'll know when it happens. You'll feel it. And when you do, you'll understand why it was worth the wait.